The morning sky over Seoul turned dark at exactly 9:47 a.m. Not from clouds or storms, but from something much worse. A massive alien ship, bigger than 10 city blocks put together, slowly descended through the atmosphere. Its shadow fell across. Millions of people who stopped walking, stopped driving, and stopped breathing for just a moment. Hana was watering her small balcony garden when the darkness came. At 73 years old, she had seen many strange things in her life. Wars, famines, economic crashes, and even the time her neighbor's dog learned how to open doors. But this was different. She looked up at the enormous metal shape hanging in the sky and made a small clicking sound with her tongue. "Well," she said to her tomato plants, "this is going to be troublesome." Across the city, people were screaming, running, crying, or standing frozen in shock. Traffic stopped completely as drivers abandoned their cars to stare at the impossible sight above them. News reporters scrambled to their cameras. Military officers shouted orders into radios. Politicians held emergency meetings that accomplished nothing except creating more panic. The alien ship was beautiful in a terrifying way. Its hull was smooth and dark, like polished stone, with strange patterns of light flowing across its surface. It made no sound as it moved, which somehow made it even more frightening. The ship positioned itself directly over the center of Seoul and simply waited. Inside government buildings, President Park and her advisors watched the situation with growing dread. General Lee, the head of South Korea's military forces, studied radar readings that made no sense. The ship was so large that their instruments could barely measure it properly. "What do they want?" President Park asked, though she suspected the answer would not be good. "We don't know yet," General Lee replied. "We've tried every communication channel we have. Radio, satellite, even old emergency frequencies. Nothing." "Maybe they're peaceful," suggested Minister Kim, hopefully. Everyone in the room looked at him like he had suggested that the sky was actually purple. Ships that size were not built for peaceful visits. At exactly 10:15 a.m., every television, radio, computer screen, and smartphone on Earth displayed the same image. A tall, reptilian creature stood in what appeared to be the bridge of the alien ship. Its skin was covered in scales that shifted colors like oil on water. It had large yellow eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth that were clearly designed for eating meat. The creature spoke, and somehow everyone understood its words perfectly, regardless of what language they normally spoke. "Humans of Earth," the alien said in a voice like grinding metal. "I am Ambassador Thexval of the Velthian Empire. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our territory." Hana, who was now sitting in her small kitchen with a cup of tea, raised an eyebrow. She had been through the Korean War, lived through decades of poverty, and raised 5 children on practically nothing. The word incorporation sounded like a fancy way of saying something very unpleasant. "You have 72 hours to surrender." "Completely," the ambassador continued. "All human governments must dissolve. All military forces must disarm. All humans will be relocated to processing centers where you will be evaluated for your usefulness to the Empire." On television screens around the world, the alien's image was replaced by footage of other planets. Worlds that had once been green and alive now looked like giant factories. Humans could see other alien species working in massive mining operations, constructing buildings, and performing what looked like slave labor. "Resistance is pointless," Ambassador Thexval said as his image returned. "We have conquered 17 worlds without losing a single ship. Your primitive weapons cannot harm our vessels. Your governments cannot organize quickly enough to mount effective defense. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick." The transmission ended, leaving Earth in stunned silence. In her kitchen, Hana finished her tea and reached for her old rotary phone. The phone was ancient by modern standards, but it worked perfectly. She had kept it because she trusted things that were built to last. She dialed a number she had memorized 40 years ago. "Suk? Yes, it's me. Did you see the television? Yes, the aliens. Listen, can you call Yuna and tell her we need to have a meeting tonight? The usual place. And Sook? Bring your recipe book. The special one. Yes, that's right. Hana made 6 more phone calls, each one brief and seemingly casual. To anyone listening, it would sound like an old woman organizing a social gathering. She used words like knitting circle and recipe sharing and garden club meeting. But the women on the other end of the line understood perfectly. Meanwhile, world leaders were discovering just how unprepared they were for an alien invasion. Military commanders realized that their most advanced weapons were like throwing rocks at a mountain. Scientists calculated that the alien ship's technology was at least 300 years ahead of anything humans had built. Emergency sessions were called at the United Nations. Representatives from every country argued about surrender terms, evacuation plans, and last-ditch military strategies. Most of the plans involved hiding underground and hoping the aliens would get bored and leave. President Park received reports that similar alien ships had appeared over Washington, D.C., London, Moscow, Beijing, and every other major capital city on Earth. The message was clear. There was nowhere to run. But in apartment buildings, community centers, and small houses across the world, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Elderly women were making phone calls, sending text messages, and knocking on doors. They spoke in code words that had been developed over decades of managing communities, organizing relief efforts, and keeping families together during impossible times. Hana's neighbor, old Minho, came knocking on her door at 8 p.m. He was crying and shaking with fear. "Hana, what are we going to do? The aliens are going to kill us all. We should evacuate the city." Hana opened her door wider and invited him in for tea. Her apartment smelled like fresh bread and the special soap she made. Herself. Everything was clean and organized, just as it had been every day for the past 50 years. "Minho," she said gently, "sit down and drink some tea. You're getting worked up over nothing." "Nothing?" "Hana, there are aliens in the sky who want to enslave humanity." Hana handed him a cup of her special blend and patted his shoulder the way she had patted her children's shoulders when they had nightmares. "Young man," she said, "you're 70 years old. Have you learned nothing in all that time? Every problem has a solution. You just need to find the right approach." Minho wanted to argue, but something about Hana's calm confidence made him pause. She had always been the person people turned to when things went wrong. When the economy crashed, she had organized food-sharing networks. When the floods came, she had coordinated rescue efforts. When families fell apart, she somehow found ways to put them back together. What kind of solution could possibly work against alien spaceships? He asked. Hana smiled and began knitting something from a ball of yarn that seemed perfectly ordinary. "Well," she said, "that depends on whether they know anything about grandmothers." 24 hours after the alien announcement, the world's governments were still arguing about what to do. President Park had spent all night in emergency meetings that went nowhere. General Lee had drawn up 17 different military plans, all of which ended with humanity's complete defeat. The United Nations held emergency sessions where representatives shouted at each other in 12 different languages. But in a small community center basement in Busan, something much more organized was happening. Hana arrived exactly at 7 p.m., carrying a large shopping bag that clinked softly when she walked. She was followed by 11 other women, each carrying their own mysterious bags. The youngest was 68, the oldest was 84. Together, they had lived through wars, raised 43 children, buried 17 husbands, and survived every crisis South Korea had faced in the past half-century. Sook was already there, setting up folding chairs in a circle. At 75, she moved with the quick efficiency of someone who had been organizing community events for decades. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the same practical dress she had worn to every important meeting for the past 20 years. "Did everyone bring what we discussed?" Hana asked, as the women settled into their seats. Yuna nodded and opened her bag. Inside were bottles that looked like ordinary cleaning supplies, but the labels had been carefully removed. I modified the recipes like you suggested. The blue one will eat through metal in about 10 minutes. The red one creates a gas that makes people very sick to their stomachs. And the yellow one? Asked Bach, who at 80 was the group's expert on chemistry. She had worked in a factory for 30 years before retiring. The yellow one explodes when it gets hot, Yuna said calmly, as if she was discussing her favorite cake recipe. Across the circle, Sumi was unpacking what looked like knitting needles, except they were made from some kind of dark metal and had been sharpened to perfect points. I've been working on these all day. They're light enough to throw accurately, but strong enough to pierce alien skin if what we saw on television is accurate. Hana smiled approvingly. Excellent work, everyone. Now let's discuss what we know about our visitors. For the next hour, the grandmothers shared information they had gathered from news reports, internet research, and careful observation of the alien ship hovering over Seoul. They took notes in small notebooks, just as they had always done when planning community projects or organizing charity drives. They're reptilian, which means they're probably cold-blooded, observed Mira, who had been a nurse for 40 years. Cold-blooded creatures don't handle temperature changes well. Too hot or too cold, and they become sluggish. Their ship makes no sound, added Yoon, who had spent her career as a teacher before learning 17 different ways to make explosives from household items. That suggests they use some kind of energy system we don't understand. But all energy systems need fuel and maintenance. Hana opened her own notebook, which was filled with neat handwriting and small diagrams. I've been watching their patrol patterns. They send scout ships over the city every 4 hours. Always the same route, always the same timing. They're very organized, but not very creative. That's good for us, said Bach. Predictable enemies are easier to defeat. While the grandmothers planned, similar meetings were taking place in kitchens, church basements, and living rooms around the world. In Tokyo, 80-year-old Akiko was teaching her book club how to turn rice cookers into small bombs. In Mexico City, 77-year-old Carmen was showing her neighbors how to make poison from common garden plants. In London, 69-year-old Margaret was organizing a network of women who could move through the city's underground tunnels without being detected. None of these women had military training, but they all had something the aliens didn't expect: decades of experience solving impossible problems with whatever materials were available. The alien fleet, meanwhile, was preparing for easy victory. Admiral Korth stood on the bridge of his flagship, reviewing reports from his intelligence officers. Every scan of Earth's surface showed the same thing: primitive weapons, disorganized military forces, and panicked civilian populations. The humans are exactly as predicted, reported Commander Vex. No significant technology, no coordinated defense strategy, and their governments are too busy arguing to mount effective resistance. Admiral Korth nodded with satisfaction. This will be our fastest conquest yet. Begin landing preparations for tomorrow. We'll establish processing centers in their major cities and start cataloging useful specimens. What the aliens didn't know was that their sensors were designed to detect military threats. Advanced weapons, organized armies, government communications, and official resistance networks all showed up clearly on their screens. But they had no way to detect the quiet mobilization happening in community centers, living rooms, and neighborhood gatherings. Their technology was sophisticated enough to intercept military radio signals, government communications, and emergency broadcasts. But it couldn't decode conversations about recipe modifications, garden care techniques, and craft project supplies. Back in Busan, Hana's group was wrapping up their meeting. Each woman now had specific assignments for the next day. Suk would distribute modified cleaning supplies to every household in a 6-block area. Yuna would teach other women how to make improvised weapons from common household items. Mira would organize medical supplies for treating both human injuries and alien poisonings. Remember, Hannah said as they prepared to leave. "We are not soldiers. We are grandmothers protecting our families. We don't need to fight fair, and we don't need to follow anyone else's rules. We just need to win." The women nodded and began packing their supplies. As they left the community center, they looked like any group of elderly ladies heading home after a social meeting. They walked slowly, carried ordinary-looking bags, and chatted about everyday topics like the weather and their grandchildren's school performance. But each of them now carried enough knowledge and materials to cripple alien operations in their neighborhood. They had phone numbers for women in other cities who were organizing similar efforts, and they had a plan that no alien computer could predict or understand. 20 miles above them, the alien fleet continued its preparations for an easy victory. Their sensors showed no change in Earth's defensive capabilities. Their intelligence reports indicated that human governments were still paralyzed by indecision. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Admiral Korth retired to his quarters, confident that tomorrow would bring another simple conquest. In 40 years of military service, he had never encountered a species that could mount effective resistance against Velthian technology and tactics. He had never encountered Earth's grandmothers. In her small apartment, Hannah made one final phone call before going to bed. "Gina? Yes, it's your grandmother. I need you to do something for me tomorrow. Can you take your children to visit your cousin in the countryside? Just for a few days? Trust me, dear. And Gina, tell the other young mothers in your building to do the same thing." After hanging up, Hannah sat by her window and looked up at the alien ship hanging in the dark sky. Its lights pulsed in patterns that probably meant something important to the creatures inside. But Hannah wasn't interested in understanding aliens. She was interested in defeating them. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. The invasion began at dawn on the third day. Alien ships descended from the mother vessel like dark birds, landing in carefully chosen locations throughout Seoul. The ships were smaller than the main craft, but still massive compared to human vehicles. They settled in parks, shopping centers, and government buildings with mechanical precision. General Lee watched from his command bunker as reptilian soldiers emerged from the ships. Each alien warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor-like scales, and carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They moved in perfect formation, establishing checkpoints and patrol routes with military efficiency that impressed even their human enemies. "All units, fall back to secondary positions," General Lee ordered through his radio. The plan was simple: retreat, regroup, and try to buy time for evacuation efforts. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only plan they had. The aliens advanced through empty streets. Most civilians had fled or were hiding in their homes. The few humans the alien soldiers encountered offered no resistance. They simply stood quietly while being processed and cataloged for later transport to holding facilities. Commander Vex led one of the main assault groups through downtown Seoul. Everything was proceeding exactly as predicted. Humans were docile, frightened, and completely unable to mount organized resistance. Their primitive military had already retreated without firing a shot. "This species is even weaker than expected," he reported to Admiral Korth. "We should have full control of this city within 6 hours." But as his soldiers established their first checkpoint, something strange happened. An elderly human female approached their position. She was small, perhaps 5 feet tall, with gray hair and clothing that looked homemade. She carried a shopping bag and walked with the slow, careful steps of someone very old. The alien soldiers raised their weapons, but the old woman showed no fear. She simply bowed politely and continued walking past their checkpoint. One soldier moved to stop her, but she held up a small card that identified her as a local resident returning from market shopping. Commander Vex studied the human through his helmet display. His sensors detected no weapons, no communication devices, no threat of any kind, just an elderly female carrying food items and cleaning supplies. According to their intelligence briefings, elderly humans were completely harmless. Their physical capabilities declined with age, making them unsuitable for manual labor or resistance activities. "Let her pass," he ordered. "Continue monitoring for actual threats." The old woman nodded gratefully and shuffled away down the street. Her name was Suk, and she had just completed the first successful intelligence-gathering mission of the war. Over the next few hours, similar scenes played out across the city. Elderly women appeared at checkpoints carrying shopping bags, walking dogs, or simply taking slow walks through their neighborhoods. The alien soldiers began to recognize them as part of the local environment, like trees or street signs. They were always present but never threatening. What the aliens didn't realize was that these harmless old ladies were mapping every aspect of their operations. Suk noted the exact times when guard shifts changed. Yuna observed which types of equipment were left unattended during patrol rotations. Mira discovered that alien soldiers removed their helmets when they thought no one was watching, revealing potential vulnerabilities in their protective gear. By afternoon, the aliens had established complete control over Central Seoul. They set up communication arrays, processing centers for captured humans, and supply depots for their equipment. Everything was organized, efficient, and perfectly secure according to their tactical assessments. That evening, the first problems began. At exactly 6 p.m., 3 alien communication arrays suddenly stopped working. Technicians investigating the malfunction found that someone had poured a highly corrosive substance into their power systems. The damage was precise and deliberate, but security cameras showed only an elderly woman cleaning nearby windows with what appeared to be ordinary household cleanser. At 7 p.m., an entire squad of alien soldiers became violently ill after eating food provided by helpful local residents. The humans claimed they were simply offering traditional hospitality to their new visitors. Medical scans revealed the soldiers had been poisoned, but with substances so common on Earth that they could have come from any kitchen or garden. At 8 p.m., a major supply depot suffered a series of small explosions that destroyed critical equipment and supplies. Investigation revealed that someone had hidden improvised explosive devices throughout the facility. The bombs were crude but effective, made from materials that could be purchased at any grocery store or hardware shop. Commander Vex stood amid the smoking ruins of his supply depot, trying to understand what was happening. His soldiers reported seeing elderly human females in the area throughout the day, but all had appeared harmless. Their activities had seemed completely innocent. Cleaning, shopping, walking pets, tending small gardens. How did they get past? "Our security," he demanded. His intelligence officer consulted his reports. "Sir, our sensors detected no weapons, no military communications, no organized resistance activities. The elderly humans showed no behavioral patterns consistent with hostile intent." "Then how do you explain this?" Commander Vex gestured at the destroyed equipment. The intelligence officer had no answer. Their computer systems were designed to identify threats based on Veilthian military doctrine. Young males with weapons training, organized command structures, advanced technology, and aggressive behavioral patterns. The idea that elderly females could pose any kind of military threat was literally not programmed into their thinking. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Hana was coordinating the next phase of operations. Her ancient rotary phone rang constantly as women throughout the city reported their successes and requested new assignments. "The communication tower on 5th Street is down," reported one caller. "Excellent. What about the patrol schedules?" "They change guards every 4 hours, just like you predicted. And we confirmed they can't see very well in bright light. Their eyes are adapted for dim conditions." Hana made notes in her careful handwriting. Each piece of information was valuable, adding to a growing understanding of alien weaknesses and operational patterns. Her neighbor Minho knocked on her door around 9 p.m. He looked confused and worried. "Hana, there are explosions all over the city." The aliens are saying it's some kind of terrorist attack. Should we evacuate? Hana invited him in for tea, just as she had the night before. Her apartment was clean and peaceful, showing no signs that she was coordinating a citywide resistance operation. Don't worry, Minho, everything is under control. Under control? The aliens have weapons that can destroy buildings. How can anything be under control? Hana handed him a cup of her special blend and smiled the patient smile of someone who had raised 5 children through impossible circumstances. You know, when my youngest son was 3 years old, he used to have terrible tantrums. He would scream and throw things and act like the world was ending. But eventually he would get tired and fall asleep. Then I would clean up the mess and fix whatever he had broken. Minho stared at her. Are you comparing alien invaders to a 3-year-old having a tantrum? I'm saying that bullies are the same everywhere. They depend on fear and intimidation. But if you're not afraid and you know their weaknesses, they're just big children with better toys. Outside, another explosion lit up the night sky as one of the alien patrol ships suffered a mysterious engine failure and crashed into an empty parking lot. The pilot survived but would report that his fuel system had been contaminated with some kind of cleaning solvent that caused catastrophic corrosion. Admiral Korth received the damage reports in growing disbelief. In one day, his perfectly organized occupation force had suffered more equipment losses than in the previous 3 planetary conquests combined, and they still had no idea who was attacking them or how. Increase security around all facilities, he ordered. Institute stricter screening procedures for any humans approaching our positions. But the next morning brought fresh disasters. Alien soldiers found their breakfast rations had been replaced with food that caused immediate digestive distress. Computer systems crashed after being cleaned with substances that seemed harmless but contained precisely the right chemicals to destroy alien electronics. Weapons malfunctioned when their power cells were exposed to compounds that elderly humans used for removing stains from clothing. The Vielthian Empire was facing their first military defeat at the hands of an enemy they couldn't identify, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. And the grandmothers were just getting started. On the 4th day of the invasion, Captain J finally understood what his grandmother was doing. The 28-year-old army officer had been trying to reach Bach for 3 days. Every time he called her apartment, the phone just rang and rang. He was terrified that something had happened to her during the alien occupation. Finally, he decided to risk traveling across the city to check on her. Using back streets and abandoned buildings, he made his way to her neighborhood while avoiding alien patrols. What he found when he reached her small house made him question everything he thought he knew about warfare. His 76-year-old grandmother was running a military operation that would have impressed his commanding officers. Her kitchen had been converted into a chemical laboratory. The dining room table was covered with detailed maps of alien positions, patrol schedules, and equipment specifications. Her living room contained stacks of improvised weapons, communication equipment, and supplies organized with perfect military precision. But most shocking of all were the women working throughout the house. 8 elderly ladies, all moving with quiet efficiency, preparing for what was clearly a major assault operation. "Grandmother," Jay said, standing in the doorway with his mouth hanging open. Bach looked up from a device she was assembling from what appeared to be kitchen utensils and electronic components. She smiled the same warm smile she had given him as a child, but her eyes held a hardness he had never seen before. "Hello, dear. I was wondering when you would find me. Come in, but wipe your feet. I just cleaned those floors." Jay entered the house like a man walking into a dream. "Grandmother, what is all this?" "We're going to end this invasion tonight," Bach said simply, returning to her work. "The aliens have made several critical errors, and we're going to take advantage of them." "We? You mean the military? The government?" Bach laughed, a sound that contained no humor. "The military is hiding in bunkers. The government is arguing about surrender terms. We are the only organized resistance left. She gestured around the room at the other women, all of whom continued their work while listening to the conversation. Meet my strike team. Sumi used to be a chemistry teacher. Yuna worked in electronics manufacturing for 30 years. Yoon knows more about explosives than most soldiers. And Hana coordinates similar operations throughout the city. Jay looked around the room with new understanding. These weren't just elderly women having a social gathering. They were a highly organized military unit operating with precision that matched any professional army. How is this possible? He asked. Sit down, Bok said, patting a chair beside her. Let me explain what we've learned about our visitors. For the next hour, she briefed him on intelligence that the official military would have killed to possess. The aliens had superior technology, but they also had critical weaknesses that could be exploited by anyone who understood their biology and psychology. They're cold-blooded, which means they become sluggish in temperature extremes. Their armor is nearly impenetrable, but their helmets have ventilation systems that can be compromised with the right chemical compounds. Most importantly, they think in very rigid patterns. They expect resistance to follow military doctrine, so they can't adapt to unconventional tactics. But how did you learn all this? Bok smiled. Dear boy, I've been gathering intelligence for 76 years. Do you think raising 5 children, managing a household during 3 economic crashes, and keeping a community together through countless crises teaches you nothing about understanding your opponents? She handed him a notebook, filled with precise observations, technical diagrams, and operational plans. We've been watching them for 4 days. We know their schedules, their equipment, their behavioral patterns, and their weaknesses. Tonight, we're going to use that knowledge. You're going to attack the alien command ship? We're going to infiltrate it, corrected Sumi, looking up from her chemical preparations. The maintenance systems are too small for their soldiers, but perfect for people our size. We've mapped the entire access network. Jay stared at the women with a mixture of admiration and terror. This is insane. You're talking about a suicide mission against the most advanced military force in the galaxy. No, said Bok firmly. We're talking about protecting our families using skills we've developed over decades of keeping impossible situations under control. This isn't different from any other crisis we've survived. It's just bigger. She stood and moved to a window overlooking the alien command ship hovering above the city. Those creatures made the mistake of thinking that age makes humans weak and harmless. They don't understand that age gives us something much more valuable than strength. It gives us experience, patience, and the absolute determination that comes from having everything to lose. That evening, 12 elderly women gathered in Bok's living room for final preparations. Each carried a small bag containing tools, chemicals, and weapons that looked completely innocent to casual observation. They wore dark clothing and comfortable shoes. Their average age was 73. Captain Jay watched them prepare with the fascination of someone witnessing history being made. Shouldn't you have backup, support teams, communication with military command? Hana, who had arrived an hour earlier, answered while checking her equipment. We are the backup. We are the support team, and military command is still trying to figure out how to surrender gracefully. What about me? I could help. I have combat training. You have training for fighting other humans using conventional weapons and tactics, Bok said gently. This requires different skills. We need people who can move silently through small spaces, work with improvised materials, and adapt quickly when plans go wrong. We need grandmothers. At exactly 11 p.m., the strike team left the house. They moved through the city using routes. They had mapped over the previous days, avoiding alien patrols with the ease of people who had been walking these streets for decades. Captain Jay followed at a distance, amazed by their coordination and precision. They communicated through subtle hand signals, moved without making sound, and navigated obstacles with an efficiency that would have impressed Special Forces units. The alien command ship loomed above them, its hull gleaming with unknown technologies. It seemed impossible that 12 elderly women could pose any threat to such a massive vessel. But as Jay watched his grandmother and her team disappear into maintenance shafts barely visible to the naked eye, he began to understand something that the aliens had failed to grasp. They weren't just fighting elderly humans. They were fighting mothers and grandmothers who had spent their entire lives making the impossible work, fixing what couldn't be fixed, and protecting their families against overwhelming odds. And for the first time since the invasion began, Captain Jay believed that humanity might actually win. High above, Admiral Korth reviewed damage reports that made no sense. His occupation force was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that didn't exist according to every analysis his computers could perform. Equipment failures, poisoning incidents, and sabotage operations continued to escalate, but security systems detected no organized resistance. "Sir," reported his intelligence officer, "we've identified a pattern in the attacks. They all occur in areas where elderly human females were observed during the previous day." Admiral Korth studied the data with growing confusion. "You're suggesting that geriatric humans are conducting military operations against us?" The evidence supports no other conclusion. For the first time in 40 years of military service, Admiral Korth felt genuinely uncertain. His species had conquered 17 worlds by understanding enemy capabilities and responding with superior force. But he had no framework for understanding an enemy that looked harmless, used primitive weapons, and operated outside every recognized pattern of warfare. "Increase security around the command ship," he ordered, "and scan for any approaching humans, regardless of age or apparent threat level." But 12 grandmothers were already inside his vessel, moving through maintenance systems with the quiet confidence of people who had spent decades fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixable. The war was about to change in ways that no computer could predict. Inside the alien command ship, 12 grandmothers moved through maintenance tunnels with the quiet precision of surgeons. The passageways were barely large enough for their small frames, designed for automated repair systems rather than living beings. But women who had spent decades crawling under kitchen sinks and behind washing machines to fix household problems found the tight spaces familiar rather than frightening. Hannah led the way, following a map they had created from careful observation of the ship's external structure. Behind her, Sook carried a bag of modified cleaning supplies that could dissolve alien technology as effectively as they removed stubborn stains. Yuna brought electronic devices rebuilt from television remotes and radio components, designed to interfere with alien computer systems. The ship's interior was a maze of corridors, chambers, and technical areas filled with equipment that hummed with unknown energy. Strange lights pulsed along the walls in patterns that probably meant something important to the aliens. But the grandmothers ignored the impressive technology and focused on finding the critical systems that kept the vessel functioning. "The power distribution center should be just ahead," whispered Bach, consulting notes written in her careful handwriting. "Remember, we have 12 minutes before the next security patrol." They had been studying alien patrol schedules for days, noting the precise timing of every security check and guard rotation. The aliens were incredibly organized, but their predictability was a weakness that experienced women could exploit. Yoon reached the power center first and began unpacking tools that looked like kitchen utensils but had been modified for sabotage work. "This reminds me of the old electrical system in my apartment building. Same principle, just fancier materials." She began working on alien power systems with the confidence of someone who had been fixing broken appliances for 50 years. The technology was advanced, but electricity was electricity, and circuits followed logical patterns regardless of who built them. Meanwhile, Sumi located the ship's water recycling system and began introducing chemical compounds that would make the entire facility uninhabitable for reptilian biology. The substances were harmless to humans but would cause severe illness in cold-blooded creatures. "How much time?" asked Yuna, who was connecting improvised electronic devices to alien computer terminals. 8 minutes, Hana replied, keeping watch, while her team worked. What the grandmothers were doing would have seemed impossible to military experts. They had no advanced training, no sophisticated equipment, and no support from official forces. But they had something more valuable: decades of experience solving impossible problems with whatever materials were available. When Bach's washing machine broke during a flood, she fixed it using parts from 3 other appliances and determination. When Suk's kitchen caught fire, she put it out and rebuilt it better than before. When Yuna's husband lost his job during an economic crash, she started 3 small businesses and kept her family fed. These were women who had made the impossible, worked countless times before. Infiltrating an alien spaceship was just another household emergency that needed to be handled. "Something's wrong," Yoon said suddenly, looking up from her work on the power systems. "These readings don't match what we expected." Hana moved to examine Yoon's equipment. The alien power grid was more complex than their observations had suggested, with backup systems and redundancies they hadn't detected from outside the ship. "Can you still disable it?" she asked. "Not the way we planned, but—" Yoon smiled with the expression of someone who had just solved a difficult puzzle. "I can overload the main coupling system. It will cause a cascade failure that shuts down everything at once." "What's the risk?" "The ship will lose all power, including life support and artificial gravity. We'll have about 3 minutes to get out before the emergency systems activate." Hana considered their options. They had come too far to retreat now, and this might be their only chance to cripple the alien command vessel. "Do it," she decided. While Yoon worked on the power systems, the other women continued their sabotage throughout the ship. Suk contaminated the air recycling system with compounds that would make breathing difficult for reptilian lungs. Yuna planted electronic viruses in computer terminals that would spread throughout the alien network like digital infections. Mira found the ship's medical bay and introduced biological agents that would render alien medicine ineffective. The substances were common Earth bacteria that alien immune systems had never encountered, but which would cause debilitating illness in reptilian biology. 2 minutes, warned Hana as she monitored their escape route. The grandmothers worked, with quiet efficiency, each completing their assigned tasks while staying ready to evacuate at a moment's notice. They moved like people who had coordinated complex family gatherings, community events, and crisis responses for decades. "Ready," announced Yoon, her hand hovering over the device that would overload the alien power grid. "Everyone to the escape." "Route!" ordered Hana. "Yoon, give us 30 seconds, then activate." The women crawled through maintenance tunnels with practiced speed, moving toward external access ports they had identified during their reconnaissance. Behind them, Yoon counted down the seconds before triggering the cascade failure that would cripple the command ship. At exactly the 30-second mark, she activated her device and began crawling toward the exit as fast as her 78-year-old body could move. The alien power grid lasted exactly 18 seconds before catastrophic failure spread throughout every system on the ship. Lights went out, computers crashed, life support stopped functioning, and artificial gravity failed completely. Emergency alarms began wailing as the massive vessel lost power and began falling toward the city below. Admiral Korth and his crew found themselves floating helplessly in darkness, while their ship's automated systems tried to restart critical functions. "What happened?" Admiral Korth demanded, though he was shouting into darkness since the communication system had also failed. Emergency lighting flickered on after 2 minutes, revealing chaos throughout the command vessel. Equipment was scattered, crew members were injured from floating debris, and damage reports painted a picture of complete system failure. "Sir," reported a technician who was trying to restart the main computer, "it appears that someone introduced multiple sabotage devices throughout the ship. Power grid, life support, computer network, medical systems, even the food preparation areas have been compromised. How is that possible? Our security detected no intruders. The sabotage was conducted using primitive devices made from common materials. Our sensors are designed to detect advanced technology, not improvised equipment made from kitchen appliances and cleaning supplies. Admiral Korth stared at the technician in disbelief. Are you telling me that this ship was crippled by household items? Yes, sir. And, sir, the sabotage devices are still active. The contamination is spreading through our life support system. We need to evacuate immediately, or our crew will become too ill to function. Below them, 12 grandmothers emerged from maintenance access ports and walked calmly away from the disabled alien command ship. They looked like elderly women returning, home from a late evening social gathering, carrying empty shopping bags and moving with the careful steps of people mindful of their age. Captain J met them 2 blocks away, staring in amazement as the massive alien vessel crashed into an empty field with enough force to shake windows throughout the city. You did it, he said, hardly able to believe what he had witnessed. You actually destroyed their command ship. We didn't destroy it, corrected Hana, adjusting her coat and checking to make sure her hair was still neat. We just made it uninhabitable. For reptilian life forms, there's a difference. But how? How did you know it would work? Bach smiled and patted her grandson's cheek the same way she had when he was a child, asking how she managed to fix his broken toys. Sweetheart, when you've spent 70 years making things work that weren't supposed to work, you develop certain skills. We just applied those skills to a bigger problem. Around them, the city erupted in celebration as word spread that the alien command ship had been defeated. But the grandmothers simply walked home to their apartments, planning to have tea and discuss what needed to be done next. After all, they had families to protect, and the work wasn't finished yet. The Valthian fleet began retreating at sunrise on the 5th day. Admiral Korth, broadcasting from a backup vessel after abandoning his crippled command ship, sent a message that would be studied by military historians for centuries. Command. Central, this is Admiral Korth reporting total mission failure. Recommend immediate withdrawal from Earth system. This species possesses defensive capabilities that exceed all tactical projections and operational parameters. Explain, came the reply from Valthian High Command, transmitted across 17 light-years of space. Admiral Korth looked around the cramped emergency bridge where his remaining officers worked at salvaged equipment. Half his crew was still recovering from illness caused by contaminated life support systems. The other half was trying to repair damage caused by devices made from kitchen appliances and cleaning supplies. The humans possess an invisible army of elderly female warriors whose capabilities cannot be measured by conventional analysis. They infiltrate secure facilities without detection, create advanced weapons from primitive materials, and coordinate operations using communication networks we cannot intercept or decode. There was a long pause before High Command responded. You are reporting defeat by geriatric human females? I am reporting defeat by the most effective unconventional warfare specialists we have ever encountered. Age appears to enhance their capabilities rather than diminish them. They demonstrate tactical knowledge, technical expertise, and operational coordination that surpasses our military training protocols. Another pause. Are you experiencing psychological breakdown, Admiral? Admiral Korth looked at his damage reports, casualty lists, and equipment failures. In 40 years of military service, he had never experienced anything like the systematic defeat inflicted by Earth's grandmothers. I am recommending that Earth be classified as a Class X hostile environment unsuitable for conquest. The species should be avoided unless we develop entirely new tactical doctrines. As the alien fleet withdrew, leaving behind scattered equipment and confused ground forces, Earth's governments struggled to understand what had happened. President Park held emergency meetings with military leaders who had no explanation for their sudden victory. General Lee, our satellites show the alien fleet retreating. Our intelligence services report systematic equipment failures throughout their occupation forces. But we receive no reports of organized military resistance. General Lee consulted Briefings that made no sense to anyone trained in conventional warfare. Madam President, it appears that civilian resistance operations achieved what our military could not, specifically elderly female civilians using improvised weapons and household chemicals. Are you joking? I wish I were. We have confirmed. Reports of grandmothers infiltrating alien facilities, poisoning enemy troops with cooking ingredients, and sabotaging advanced technology using cleaning supplies and kitchen appliances. President Park stared at her military advisor. Grandmothers defeated an interstellar empire? Yes, Madam President. That appears to be exactly what happened. In her small apartment, Hannah was washing dishes when the news announced Earth's victory. The reporter struggled to explain how humanity had defeated an advanced alien civilization, mentioning theories about secret weapons, hidden military technology, and unprecedented international cooperation. Her neighbor Minho knocked on the door, excited and confused. Hannah, did you hear? The aliens are leaving. We won. How did we win? Hannah dried her hands on a kitchen towel and invited him in for tea. Her apartment showed no signs that she had recently coordinated the most successful unconventional warfare campaign in human history. We won because they underestimated us, she said simply, setting out cups for her special blend. But how? They had spaceships and energy weapons and technology we don't understand. Minho, do you remember when your grandson was 5 years old and decided to take apart your television? Yes. It took me a week to fix it. And who actually fixed it? Minho thought for a moment. My wife did. She said she understood how things were supposed to work together. Exactly. The aliens understood their own technology, but they didn't understand how to break other people's technology. They certainly didn't understand how to defend against people who have spent decades fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixable. That afternoon, Captain J visited his grandmother Bach, who was back to her normal routine of tending her small garden and preparing dinner for the neighborhood children who often visited after school. Grandmother, the news is calling you heroes. They want to give you medals and interview you for television. Bach continued weeding her tomato plants, a task she had been doing for 40 years. That's nice, dear, but I'm busy right now. Don't. You want recognition for saving the world? Bach looked up at her grandson with the patient expression she used when explaining obvious things to children. Sweetheart, we didn't save the world. We protected our families. That's what grandmothers do. But the aliens had superior technology and military training. They had fancy tools and rigid thinking. We had experience and flexibility. When you've raised children, managed households, and kept communities together through impossible circumstances, you learn that every problem has a solution. You just need to find the right approach. She returned to her gardening, adding quietly, Besides, they made the same mistake everyone makes about elderly women. They assumed we were harmless because we're old and small and use simple tools. They forgot that grandmothers have been protecting their families from every kind of threat for thousands of years. A week later, reporters from around the world descended on Seoul, trying to understand how a small group of elderly women had defeated an interstellar empire. They interviewed government officials, military experts, and technology specialists, all of whom offered theories about secret weapons and hidden capabilities. But when they tried to interview the grandmothers themselves, they found ordinary elderly, women who seemed more interested in discussing their grandchildren than explaining military tactics. How did you know your plan would work? A reporter asked Suk during one of the few interviews the women agreed to give. The same way I know how to make kimchi, Suk replied. You learn what ingredients to use, you follow the right process, and you adjust as needed based on experience. But weren't you afraid of the alien technology? Young man, I raised 4 children during 3 economic crashes, survived 2 wars, and kept a family fed when there was no food in the markets. After that, everything else is just another problem that needs solving. The reporter tried a different approach. What message do you have for other planets that might face alien invasion? Suk thought for a moment, then smiled. Don't let them frighten you. Bullies are the same everywhere. They depend on fear and intimidation. But if you're not afraid, and you know their weaknesses, they're just big children with better toys. 6 months later, the Velthian Empire updated their military protocols to include warnings about Earth's post-reproductive female demographics. Their tactical manuals now contained extensive sections on unconventional warfare, improvised weapons, and the dangers of underestimating elderly civilian populations. The warnings were distributed throughout their empire and shared with allied species. Earth became the first planet in galactic history to be avoided not because of military might or advanced technology, but because of its grandmothers. In Seoul, life returned to normal. Hana continued tending her garden, Suk organized community events, and Bak taught neighborhood children how to fix broken appliances. They met regularly for tea and conversation, discussing their families, their communities, and occasionally sharing new techniques for making household cleaning supplies work more effectively. To anyone watching, they looked like ordinary elderly, women living quiet, peaceful lives. No one would suspect that they had recently saved human civilization from alien conquest, but if another threat ever emerged, if their families or communities faced danger from any source, the grandmothers would be ready. They would organize, adapt, and apply decades of experience to whatever new problem required solving. After all, protecting the people they loved was what grandmothers did best, and they had been practicing for a very long time. The galaxy learned an important lesson from the failed invasion of Earth. Never underestimate the beings who have spent their lives making impossible things work. They know exactly where all the weak points are, and they have no intention of fighting fair. Earth's grandmothers had won the war not through superior technology or military training, but through the most powerful force in the universe, the determination of people who refused to let anyone harm their families, and that was a lesson the galaxy would never forget.